All right, welcome back to the channel. And in this video, we're going to talk about the upcoming fight with Gary Russell Jr. versus Mark Magsayo that airs tonight, and give a prediction for that fight. Make sure that you listen all the way to the end. Let's do that in this video. Welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. All right, man, we got a really exciting fight coming up tonight between Gary Russell Jr., the WBC 126-pound champion, and Mark Magsayo, his mandatory challenger for that title. Before I get into the prediction of what I think is going to happen in this fight, thank you very much for coming to the channel. Also, make sure that you subscribe, hit the share button, share the video, like the video, and also hit that, if you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos, which we do on a daily basis, and I think you'll enjoy. So, all right, man, here we go. Gary Russell Jr., Mark Magsayo. This is what I think is more than likely going to happen. I've got Gary Russell Jr. winning this fight on a unanimous decision, despite the fact that Mark Magsayo has several advantages in this fight and I do believe that it's going to be a very, very good fight and an intriguing fight for a while, but that Gary Russell Jr. is just going to be one step ahead of Mark Magsayo throughout this fight. Now, Mark Magsayo, the most important reason that I say this is because of the history of, the history of Mark Magsayo. Mark Magsayo, who is a very, very strong fighter, quick, very, very quick, fights somewhat like Manny Pacquiao out of an orthodox stance. Out of his own mouth, admits that he does not like to fight southpaws. And so the fact that, and if you look at Mark Magsayo's record since he stepped up in competition, and I would say that he's really stepped up in competition over his last 4 or so fights, he has fought, of the southpaws of the times that he's gone the distance, 2 of the 3 times that he has gone the distance, that has been against southpaws, and he went the distance against both southpaws that he fought. One who was a lower level fighter, he got a unanimous decision off of, and the other one he got a split decision win off of. And if you look at that fight, you can tell how there's just a lot of opportunities for Gary Russell Jr., to take advantage of Mark Magsayo. Specifically, the things that I see with Mark Magsayo is that Mark Magsayo, against the southpaws that I've seen him fight, really does not establish his lead foot on the outside of the southpaw, and as a result, when he tries to throw his 1-2, which I think is probably his best combination, he winds up having to throw the jab and then throw his right hand across his body when the southpaw pivots out. And Gary Russell Jr. is expert at that, and one of the best southpaws that there is in the business. Most definitely has some of the quickest hands in all of boxing. Now, I do believe that there is going to be opportunities for Mark Magsayo to score points throughout the fight, right? But pretty much Mark Magsayo is going to need a knockout. I think he's going to need a knockout to beat Gary Russell Jr. Gary Russell Jr. pretty much throws shots straight down the middle. Very rarely, unless he has a guy in trouble or he's throwing hooks, very rarely does he ever throw his punches very wide. And and many times, definitely against orthodox fighters, he's very able to control the jab of the orthodox fighter by pawing and parrying and keeping that lead hand of the orthodox fighter at bay. And I do believe that, one of the big advantages that Mark Magsayo has is his hand speed over a lot of fighters, but this will be an instance where I do not believe he'll have that. Also, again, this is maybe, like I said, the third or fourth step up fight for Mark Magsayo. And in the last fight that he had with Saya, who was knocked out previously by Guillermo Rigondeaux to fight at 122, Mark Magsayo was losing that fight. He wound up getting he got a knockout of Saya in the first round, and he wound up knocking him out in the 10th. But between the first round and the 10th round, I think Saya might have won every single solitary round in that fight, and wound up pretty much relegating Mark Magsayo to chasing him around, looking for big shots, which eventually he did get against Saya, but I don't think that you can count on that versus Gary Russell Jr. Now, some people say that Gary Russell Jr. gasses out towards the end of the fights. I don't necessarily I have not seen that. What I do believe is that he does not really try to lay into or go after fighters as much as he did when he was several years ago, and he winds up being able to win and kind of can maintain himself for a 12 round decision. I think Gary Russell Jr., the main difference that is going to pull this fight out for Gary Russell Jr. over Mark Magsayo is Gary Russell Jr.'s defense. It's going to be very, very hard for Mark Magsayo to create a consistent and effective offense against the southpaw Gary Russell Jr., especially when Mark Magsayo himself admits that he doesn't really fight that well against southpaws. Now, the thing that I'm looking forward to now that's not to say, let me say this first, that there's not a chance that Mark Magsayo can win, because Mark Magsayo is a very big puncher, and if he's able to get a clean shot off on Gary Russell Jr. And connect with him, there's a chance that he could hurt Gary Russell Jr. and he may be able to get Gary Russell Jr. out of there. Although I have never seen in Gary Russell Jr.'s career him get hit and really even get buzzed by anybody. Now, if recall that haven't happened, please put it in the comment section. I haven't seen it happen. Now, there was some speculation about the weigh-in, though, that some people believe that Gary Russell Jr. looked drained in the weigh-in. Obviously, he had missed the weight the first time, coming in at 126.5, had to lose a half a pound within an hour, winds up losing a whole pound in an hour, coming in at 25.5, right? So the mismanagement of his weight may point to something. Some people said that he looked like he was a little bit dry in the weigh-in, and also there was a lot of stuff going on in Gary Russell Jr.'s camp. Right, his father, the word is, and is, I definitely feel sorry. Prayers go out to his family. Father had to have a foot amputated, so his father wasn't there in training, so he had to do a lot of the training for this fight himself. So, his team was a little bit depleted. He also said in the interview the day before the fight that he had a minor injury, something that he wasn't going to talk about or detail until after the fight. So, there's that as well. So a combination of having your camp off, having your weight off a little bit, and having an injury, that very well may, give Mark Magsayo an opportunity to take advantage of where he wasn't. And there's obviously also, the relative inactivity of Gary Russell Jr. This will be the first fight that he's had in 2 years. So, there may be, some amount of ring rust in there for him. But all of that said, Gary Russell Jr. has been fighting once a year for a long time. Every time I've seen him come off of a layoff, he's looked just as sharp as he has looked very, very sharp, even though he hasn't fought for a while. He says he's constantly staying in the gym, constantly sparring. I saw some videotape of him sparring. There was, of live tape of him sparring. So he's out there, he's not taking time off from the gym. He stays active, stays in the gym. So, and he knows how to, to turn it on, from sparring into, the actual match, as you see, because he's boxing's longest reigning champion. So anyway, man, I'm looking forward to seeing what this fight is. I got Gary Russell Jr. by unanimous decision. The next step for Gary after he wins this fight, if he's able to win this fight, the word is that he will be moving up to 130 pounds to fight the winner of Chris Colbert versus Gutierrez, who will be the WBC super champion. So definitely looking forward to that, man. Anyway, it's going to be what it is. Let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Peace.